Hello and welcome to the Town Hall Theatre in Galway for the first John Kelly in Public. My guest today is an actor whose performances are among the most unforgettable and most talked about in cinema. Here's a brief list of some of the movies: The French Lieutenant's Woman, Betrayal, Damage, Lolita and Dead Ringers. Let's not forget Reversal of Fortune, for which he won an Oscar. Elizabeth I, with its Emmys and Golden Globes, and of course his work in the theatre, where he received a Tony Award for his role in Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing. Many of us will have seen him first perhaps in Brideshead Revisited, which is now, I have to tell you, and I don't want to put anybody in shock, 26 years ago. He was pictured in the newspapers this week playing the fiddle, and indeed, as a resident of Cork, he is in more ways than one eligible to play for Ireland. Would you please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Irons.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, if we could begin, a lot of actors talk about their early days and their desire to become an actor is coming from shyness, coming from all sorts of places. But in your case, you were particularly attracted to the lifestyle. And that might seem odd because many actors are here and people who know actors, and they know that that lifestyle is difficult. It doesn't necessarily involve any kind of financial reward. It involves travel, it involves maybe never having a home, all those things. And yet it was the lifestyle that attracted you first. And why was that?
Well, I went to English public school, boarding school, and was educated with some fairly tedious people, really. And we were being educated to be sort of middle management, military or bank or whatever. And in those days, you thought of as a career as something you started when you started it after school or after university, and you finished it when you retired. That's whatever it was, 65. And I thought, that sounds an awfully boring life. I want to sort of flit about a bit. The nearest I could get to it in my head was that I wanted to be a gypsy. And I thought I'd like to possibly work in the circus or in the traveling fun fairs, or maybe in the theatre. But it seemed maybe perhaps a bit of a dream. And so when I left school, I went and worked as a social worker. And that gave me quite a lot. I worked with kids in South London. It knocked all the bullshit out of me, of my privileged education. And I began to realize how to interact with less fortunate people. But what I learned was that if you're a social worker, you mustn't get involved. You've got to help people, but you mustn't get involved. And all I wanted to do was to get involved. I wanted a real sort of relationship communication. And all my advisors said, no, stay back, stay away. So I thought, well, this is a bit of a one-way. I don't think I'm selfless enough to do that, just to sort of help and not to get anything back. And that, combined with the desire to sort of live a life outside the bounds, made me take an advertisement in the stage newspaper in London. And I got a job as what they call a stage, an acting stage manager, which meant that you made the props and you sort of painted the furniture, painted the scenery, and in the evening you went on in tiny little roles and sort of stood looking odd at the edge of the stage or whatever. But what it did, it introduced me to the life. It introduced me to the people who worked in the life. It introduced me to the smells of the theatre. And going to work at 10 o'clock in the morning and going back home at 2 o'clock in the morning, sort of living a different routine to the one that I'd been expect to have, I found very attractive. And while I was there, I thought, well, this does suit me. I like the people, I like the environment, I like the work process. I better learn to try and do this. And then I auditioned to go to drama school, and that's when it began. Really.
When some people become actors or join bands, it's often because they want to be Jimi Hendrix or they want to be John Wayne or whatever it was. In your case, was there an actor on stage or on the theatre that you thought, that's cool, I'd like to do that?
Well, yeah, Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia, when I saw that, I was a very impressionable age, and I thought, how does he do that? I want to do that. That's extraordinary. Of course, I never thought I'd be able to. I was just fascinated by that. I never saw a film career for myself. I wasn't the sort of guy to do that. I thought I'd perhaps just, become a jobbing actor in the theatre. That's what I never wanted fame. Fortunately, I think an awful lot of people these days do want fame, which something I'm very concerned about with young people. They don't seem to realize that fame has no value unless there's a particularly full restaurant that you want to get into. But that's about the only thing. All fame means is that more people know you than you know. And it creates an imbalance. It's rather uncomfortable. And it's not anything to be courted or to be looked for. And so many people on reality television and whatever, they just want to be famous. Why?
There was a point, though, Jeremy, when you decided you were going to give yourself a certain amount of time to see if you would make it as a successful actor. And you were, that was between 25 and 30, I think it was.
Yeah, I said I felt that I could, at 30, I'd have the energy and whatever to retrain if it wasn't working. And
what was in your mind then? Well, how would you have defined success at that point if it wasn't to become a famous actor, for the sake of argument?
I think supporting the lifestyle that I wanted to support. And I was, much as I wanted to be a gypsy, I was also middle class enough to want to be able to have a house, a mortgage, and a family. So really, if at the age of 30, and I'd worked, when I left theatre school and went to work in the Bristol Old Vic for 3 years, I met actors of sort of 30, 40 who were living in bedsits, and I thought, I don't want that. I want to have a family. For me was very important, and I want to be able to support that. So really, that's what I was gauging it by. And by the time I was 30, Brideshead was about to come out. I had a son, my first son. I had a beautiful wife, and I had a home. So I thought, seems to be working for today. But always, my fail-safe is that I'm a great window cleaner. And people always need window cleaners. So at the back of my head, I think, if it falls apart, if the bomb drops or whatever, then I can always clean windows.
How did all of those things, you kind of joke about the window cleaning, however, you did work at all sorts of jobs. You took them all very seriously. You did them as well as you could, no matter what that job was. How did that inform your approach to acting? Because a lot of actors, maybe never had any other kind of job and went into it for all sorts of spurious reasons. But you were a kind of a working man.
Yeah, well, in drama school, I worked as a builder to earn my living expenses. My father paid my fees. I was lucky for that. And then when I was waiting to get work in London, because after 3 years in rep, I knew I had to get my name known a little bit. And so I auditioned for everything. I found auditioning very difficult. You're sort of working in a vacuum. It's horrible. Trying to impress people, which is the last thing you should be doing when you're acting. So I auditioned just to practice it. And then if I was offered work outside where I wanted to work, which was London, I'd turn it down. But to pay the bills, I worked for a domestics agency called Domestics Unlimited. And I worked for them because they had a most wonderful logo in the what's called What's On in London, where they used to advertise. They had a little poem. And I was attracted to that. It said, I remember it to this day, it said, "A refined Lady Char from Mill Hill said, if I scrub the floors, I feel ill. Her employer said, don't. If you can't, then you won't. But Domestics Unlimited will." So I was called in to do up these houses, which were, obviously, most of the marriages living in the houses that I went to were in terrible state, because the houses were in dreadful mess. There was child vomit on the floor and dog doos in the bedrooms, and it was all ghastly.
Jeremy, I'm away for the weekend. I don't want to go back there. don't bring that up.
And
please.
I would clean it up.
Those things you mentioned there about, actors shouldn't be trying to impress people and so on. As a younger man, though, surely all those things were there. You're trying to impress the girls. You're trying to, you're trying to be, you're younger then. You've got more. You feel you've maybe more to prove. Was there any element of that, of the show off in an actor?
I was always very bad at picking up girls. When I was at school, I was in a rock group called the Four Pillars of Wisdom. I played the drums, and I was slightly worse than Ringo Starr, which is saying a lot. And the bass player, we used to have a break every now and again, and the bass player would go off. He would meet and get extremely intimate with people, and then come back after the break and tell me about it. And I thought, how did he do this? I remember his name, David. How did he do this? I couldn't, you know, I might have got at the end of the evening actually sort of caught eyes with somebody, and that was it. So I was never very good at picking up young girls. But when I was working as a social worker, I used to busk in the streets I did it through Europe. It was a great way to travel with my guitar. And I discovered that girls, they sort of came around you. They collected around you like butterflies around a bush. And that was wonderful. So I used my guitar to sort of attract the opposite sex. But acting, I never thought about. When I was in Godspell in the West End, which was my first West End show, and I would go to parties afterwards, and people would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, because I'd never want to tell them, because it would all they'd sort of start asking you about it and that sort of thing. And so I'd always say I was an apprentice baker. And the conversation would then change, because no one had anything to say to an apprentice baker. So I never used acting to impress, and never had. For me, acting is an escape. I mean, my wife described it once as the shy man's revenge, and I think there's something in that. I'm never more alone than when I'm on a stage in a character. And I find it much easier to open up completely in that situation than if I'm standing next to somebody in a room.
Well, let's get into the acting. You mentioned Brideshead. Brideshead, French Lieutenant's Woman, around the same period and so on. You took a decision, it seemed, at that point. On the back of Brideshead, you could have sat back and gone, right, I am now a successful actor, as I wanted to be by this age, etc., and kind of remained there, because there are, as you know, numerous parts for English actors to do certain things. I mean, we talk about the Irish actors, you know, stereotype characters for Irish actors, but so many magnificent English actors either have to play the villainous cad or the twit, you know, one or the other. And you clearly made a decision at that point that you weren't going to fall into that, either of those two positions.
Yeah, I made French Lieutenants and Brideshead together. I mean, they were actually interlocked. And when they both came out, and sort of I was booted skyward fame-wise, it took a bit of time to get used to that, but I didn't work for a year after that, because I didn't want to become Hollywood's new David Niven. I thought, I don't have the sort of charm for that, innate charm for that. I'm odder than that. I'm dirtier than that. I'm more peculiar. I'm more. I couldn't do that. And because the film industry is basically American, and they see English people in a particular light, like they see Irish people in a particular light, and that's how most writers write them. I thought, I don't want to play those cliched characters. So I waited, and one day a man called Jerzy Skolimowski got in touch with me and said, I have an idea for a film. And he was Polish. And I remember I had the flu, and I sat on the floor in his house while he read me this treatment. And I said, well, that's very interesting. It's about Polish builders stuck in London and building a house. And I said, it's a very interesting script. He said, if you say you'll do it, I get the money tomorrow. And that was a great feeling, one of the great feelings for me, because I thought, I have pulling power. I can create films. And I called my agent and said, this guy's going to ring you, say yes. I went away somewhere, I don't know, and came back, and he'd got the script. And there we were, and there was me playing a Polish builder. And that sort of kicked me out of the David Niven area I was worried about. And when I met Werner Herzog some years later in Sydney, Australia, the Austrian director, he said to me, you are Jeremy Irons? And I said, yes. He said, no, Jeremy Irons is Polish. I said, no, I'm Jeremy Irons, I'm English. He said, good heavens. And so I was very pleased about that. And then I began to work in France a little bit, making French films. And I thought, this is the right way for me to go, you know.
Did the part of you, though, that was very practical and had been a working man and knew what it meant and had, a life to support and so on, did part of you think, well, I don't want to get too precious about this because I need to keep working. I need to keep my eye on the ball and do my job as such, the job part of it?
At that point, I was working a great deal. making sort of 4 films a year. It coincided with my children being born, so I didn't see a lot of them when they were young. Sinead held the fort, which was great, and sacrificed to a certain extent her career for a while. But I've never worried about work coming. People who are not not actors, they say, how can you do that? How can you not know when your next work is? Which I don't know at the moment. I mean, now I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know when it'll be. And people who are used to salaries weekly think that must be very difficult. But it's just an attitude of mind. You sort of know that something will turn up. And it always does. And the important thing is to enjoy the time when you're not working, because it's the greatest privilege. You know, how many of you would love to be able to take 6 months or a year out of your career and then go back to where it was? So many people can't do that because they have commitments, they have, you know, and their wage structure isn't such and their career structure isn't such. So we're very, very lucky that we can do that. And I can go off and do other things. I can go and motorcycle or ride horses or any of the other things I love doing.
The other great thing at that period, to be working at the level you were working at, meant you got to work with great people as well. And that's something that the rest of us don't always get to do. People who work at a very high level get to meet other people working at a very high level. You know, Pinter, Meryl Streep, all those people at the same time, you know. The approach that Streep would take, or indeed any of those actors that you worked with at that time that you admire, would you have actively tried to learn from them and pick up things from them?
Constantly. I mean, it's like if you're playing a game of tennis and you get a shot that you think, where did that come from? How did he do that? Or indeed, now I'm learning the fiddle, and I'm listening to players and thinking, how does he do that? What? And always, if you work with the best, and it's a huge privilege to work with the best, and something I've always tried to do, you look and see how they do it, how they cope with those problems, what their work method is. And it's interesting, I come from the English tradition and we're very hot on technique. We have great training, great theatre schools. We have great technique as actors. We're used to playing, well, we're trained to play all periods of theatre. And I work a lot with Americans, and Americans aren't trained like that. They're trained mainly towards film and towards finding tricks to find the actual emotion that they need to produce. And some of their tricks are amazing, and their desire to make something real happen, not something acted, something real. And so I would watch them, often without technique, trying to get there. Robert De Niro is a classic example. And when I worked with him, he's changed now. He's come on a bit. But he would demand from his co-star for the co-star to make him angry, so that you would stand beside the camera if it was on his shot, and if he had to blow his top, you'd just call him every name under the sun. You'd just try and get under his skin to really make him angry. Or if he had to laugh, you'd really try to make him laugh, which is very difficult on take 8, you know, when you've done it 8 times. And I'd watch him and I'd think, this is a very uneconomic way to work. He hadn't got the technique to get into the ballpark area of the emotion that you're trying to find. So what I've tried to do is to find a sort of mid-Atlantic method, you know, really valuing what the Americans do, using the English technique to get nearly there.
But would you find that infuriating? You know that famous try-acting, dear boy. Would you ever feel like that with these guys and just go, oh, come on, just do your job?
Sometimes with the youngsters, but yeah. Sometimes.
But you know, you hear about, would you hear about James Cagney, for instance, who would just turn up and he'd do his thing brilliantly, he'd go home again.
Yeah.
That's it, that's my job.
Yeah.
And in Dead Ringers, for instance, I know you had a trick, you had 2 different people. So you had a way of...
Well, yeah, Dead Ringers, I don't know how many people have seen it, but I played 2 twin gynecologists. They offered it to Robert De Niro before me, and he said, could they be lawyers? It's a very American attitude. But anyway, they didn't turn them into lawyers, they asked me to do it. And they were 2 identical twins. And I thought this is going to be very difficult to do. And I initially said, I'm not sure I can do it, because film is anyway very technical, and you try to get over all those technical things and actually find something that's real and human. But if you're playing two people, I thought that's going to be just a nightmare. I don't know how I'm going to do that. So I went to Canada with David Cronenberg, and we spent a day doing a twinning scene where I was both people, using the technology. And I found it remarkably easy. So I said, yes, I'll do it. And then I went over and I sort of thought, I've got to have some ideas, tricks about this. So I'll have two dressing rooms, a dressing room for each character. And I went out on 2 separate days and bought the costumes for both the characters. And then we started shooting. And on about the second or third day, at the end of the day, you watch the rushes. You watch what you've shot the day before. And I was sitting there looking. I said, David, this is a disaster. It's a disaster. Anybody could tell those two apart. They're totally different. So I have to do something else. You know, I had sort of different mannerisms. They looked different. They were dressed different. And in one of the scenes, one of the identical twins has to pretend to be the other one. So, I mean, there's complicated stuff happening. Fortunately, for some reason, the gods came to my aid, and I thought I'd find something internal, an internal difference that no one can tell, but I know about, I can feel. So I found different energy points for the two of them. And one of the energy points was for Elliot, who was the sort of the cool one, the one who really was the sort of the front for the pair of them. And he had his energy between his eyes, which meant that he had quite a piercing look, and he held himself particularly upright and in a good way, and he was together, and of course that's also where you headbutt people. So it had a certain, you know, he was a man you wouldn't trifle with. And then Elliot, his other twin, I put his energy there, which is where people kill you, which is a very vulnerable place.
In the throat.
In the throat, and it made him stand quite a different way. He sort of protected that, and it made him more feminine, more gentle, and yet I looked exactly the same way. So I could switch from one to the other. And when one had to pretend to be the other, I took whatever mannerisms I knew of the one he was pretending to be, but I didn't change the energy position. So you could tell that it was Elliot pretending to be Beverly. The audience could tell.
Now, I hope they've all been listening very carefully to that. Because we'll be asking you to do it, try it after the program. You mentioned earlier about not becoming...
cut all that.
Not becoming David Niven. And clearly, you certainly weren't going to become David Niven, given the movies that you were starting to make. You know, this one, Dead Ringers, you've just been talking about, Lolita. These, even though obviously James Mason did that part and so on. But at any point, was anybody on your team, your friends, your advisors, your agents, whatever, saying, "Look, Jeremy, will you stop playing creepy guys? This is going to ruin your..."
My wife, constantly.
And that was before you went to work, yeah?
So she would constantly advise me. She advised me not to do Dead Ringers. She advised me not to do Reversal of Fortune. She advised me not to do Lolita. And she was probably absolutely right. But if I hadn't, someone else would have done, and I wouldn't have had the fun. It's very interesting playing people who live on the edge, people who go outside the rules. It's something you could... I mean, I think one of the functions of drama, be it film or theatre, is to allow the audience to go on a journey legally, which, if they did in their real lives, they get into trouble. I mean, Shakespeare does that. The Greek tragedy is all about that. And Lolita certainly is about that. It allows us to see what happens if you transgress, therefore why we have our laws and why we have our social mores. And I think that's a very valuable function of drama. So even though I suppose the most contentious film I made in that regard was Lolita, and it was at a time when this whole subject was regarded as black and white, and people were absolutely appalled that I played someone who was actually quite a nice guy, who was behaving in this way. And we had huge trouble as a result to distribute the film. It was never distributed, well, only for about 2 weeks in America.
It was cut very carefully, wasn't it, to deliberately avoid offending any law or any kind of statue.
Yeah, I mean, we went through. I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen it. Did they show it this week, Lolita?
I think it was shown, wasn't it?
Hands up who saw it. Ah, a few of you, you see.
Well, let me ask this question. I watched it during the week. In advance of doing this, I got a bunch of DVDs and I watched them. And I watched Lolita and Damage on the one night, one after another. And I was in bits after that. But the interesting point for me is I thought, well, look, if I feel like this now and I feel like I can't go to bed and I need to drink 3 bottles of whiskey or something, how do you feel in the middle of that? Or can you just go, I'm just acting, it's just a job? It must wreck your head.
No, it doesn't.
Does it not?
Not at all. No, because you come back to yourself at the end of it. And,
I mean,
at the end of the
glad
day.
that's the case, but
Yeah.
at the same time, there's some seriously heavy stuff going on in those movies.
I mean, it's difficult when you're... But Lolita should have been difficult to make because the character I was playing was a man who knew what he was doing was wrong, and yet he continued to do it. And that's difficult. You're living with that. And we were also... It was a very bad time to make it, actually. I mean, Kubrick didn't have that trouble when he made it. But now everything's got much more sensitive in those areas. And... We had to be very, very careful. Any time the girl sat on my lap, for instance, there was one of these huge, great, when you have an X-ray, you have these great lead sort of aprons to stop you getting the rays. Well, one of those was laid on my lap before she, and we had to video it happening, so that if when the film came out, anybody said this is, then we could show them that it was all fine, it's all above board. And any scene with great sexual content in it was filmed by a stand-in who was over 17 or over 16, whatever the law was. And we just had to shoot very carefully.
To make those characters sympathetic to an audience, I know it's the old story and it must be something an actor has to do, but it must be extraordinarily tricky at times to make Humbert and these guys likable. You don't want them. You want them to get away and somehow to escape.
I mean, Nabokov's book, Humbert is so funny in the book. He's such a funny old thing. He's sort of, he's a very likable character, I think. You feel a bit sad for him. So what you try to do is to, because I wasn't interested in making him likable, except it's quite difficult to have the hero of a film who you don't like. Just because the audience, you want to watch somebody who you can not necessarily like, but understand, empathize with in some way. Because I'm a great believer that there is, in all of us, the qualities to do anything. And people say to me, how can you play a murderer? I say, because there's a murderer in me. I remember I do a bit of work for the prisons, and I remember talking to a guy my age, a little bit younger maybe, in the green room. We were doing a show, and he was helping set up the stage, and we were having a cup of coffee, and I said, what are you in for? And he said, oh, don't ask me. I said, no, tell me, what are you in for? He said, I killed my girlfriend. I said, oh, how? What? Why? He said, we were having a row in the kitchen, and there was a carving knife on the table, and at one point I picked up, I said, don't say that, and I stabbed her through the heart, and she died. And I thought, right. I know a lot of people, including myself, who could, if the wrong moment happened, have done that.
Well, I think that's why Damage is kind of hard to watch. Anybody who's married, you can see that stupid mistake and your whole life just fall apart.
So I do feel that there is within all of us the capability of doing anything. And when I play these characters, I search inside myself. I mean, I sometimes think of myself, or any actor, as a piano, with all those strings under the lid, And for life, we normally play a few chords. Those are our chords. That's us. That's me. That's Jeremy. That's his sort of sound. And there's a whole load of strings I never touch, and a whole load of combinations I never touch. And when I play a character, I find other bits of me that I don't use. And I think, well, there's that there. And I play other chords, other music, but it's all from my piano. And I think within all of us, there is the possibility of anything. We could all be rapists, we could all be murderers, we could all be saints, we could, there is, saints and rapists and murderers are no different, have no different physiological makeup to us.
You mentioned, in the few moments that we have left this part of the program, you mentioned earlier about you didn't know where your next job was coming from and so on. And of course that's at one level not relevant in one way because, presumably you don't particularly need to work constantly and, you can get a big gig when you want it, and if things went badly you could keep doing Die Hard and whatever, these
Clean windows.
Clean windows.
Yeah.
That's all there. But I was struck last night when we went out for dinner and we talked about carpentry, talked about music, we talked about building castles, talked about dogs. You've loads of interests.
Yeah.
And I was struck by something you said, because I interviewed Sam Shepherd recently, and he said, frankly, I'd rather be on the ranch with the horses half the time. Would you rather be in Cork?
I'm ashamed to say yes, I would. I act to live. I don't live to act. My work, which I enjoy when it's good, not always, because sometimes you just have to pay the bills and you do work that you don't really enjoy very much. And filming is intrinsically quite a boring thing to do. It seems very glamorous, but the actual process is quite boring. And so unless you're working with really great people on really great material, it can be quite tedious, and you're usually in the back of Bulgaria or something. Nothing wrong with Bulgaria, but it's a long way away. But I have things I love doing in life, and I'm very, very lucky that, as I was saying earlier, having the gaps between my work, I'm able to live a great life, which my work supports.
There's a retrospective happening here at the moment, and if I could ask you the hardest question of all to ask, what do you think was your finest hour, your finest achievement in cinema?
Well, I don't know. I'm not the one to ask, really. But I know what I think. I think my probably best all-round work is in Lolita, because it has comedy, pathos, tragedy. It's a devilish subject. I think that's the work that's best so far.
And for anybody in here who would like to be an actor, given your, I think, much more interesting journey in acting than a lot of actors have had, would you recommend it as a profession, as a job?
No. No, I would say really don't, unless there's really nothing else you can do. Seriously, I mean, it's very, very, very tough. It's full of rejection. It's full of not being able to get work. To find fine work is really hard, much harder than when I was starting out. And if there's nothing else you can do, then have a crack at it. But it's not what it's hitched up to be. It is for those people who've been lucky in the business. For some of those people who've been lucky in the business, although there are an awful lot of unhappy people who appeared to have been lucky in the business, it's a tough one. So I would say, the advice certainly I was given when I asked an actor, he said, don't do it, do anything else but.
A strange note to end on, I think. I think we need a more positive end to the program.
But then I would say that if you do get stuck and do it, being with a group of actors or a group of film technicians, filmmakers, theatre actors, it's probably one of the best groups in the world. And I move a lot of motorcyclists are good, horse breeders are good, sailors are good, but actors, great crack.
And on that positive note, thanks, Jeremy.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. So, we'd now like to open up a few questions to the floor. Kevin is over here with a microphone. Elaine is up on the balcony with a microphone. So if you would like to ask a question, make yourself known. Wait till the mic comes to you. And if you would, identify yourself as well in case you're on the run or something.
But they have to be really interesting questions.
Oh, yeah.
And they have to have a bit of wit about them.
So no pressure.
Hi, I'm Aiden Mitchell, and I'm 13 years old. And I was wondering, a lot of times I've encountered a problem in the fact that being a young actor, I'm not taken as seriously as others, and trying to perfect my craft and trying to move forward and develop a career, I find that I'm constantly being obstructed by people not taking me seriously, and just because of my youth. And I was wondering, did you have any advice for any young actors encountering that problem?
Are you being educated at the moment?
Yes.
Where?
I homeschool.
At what?
I homeschool. It's
Do
an
you?
online course.
Uh-huh. So you homeschool, right. And where are you acting?
In Los Angeles, actually. I came over here for the film festival.
Right. And what sort of work are you doing in Los Angeles?
I've been just doing a TV show called The Riches with Eddie Izzard and Minnie Driver, and that's been great. But just trying to take some more advanced acting courses and trying to further my career. I kind of found that I've been turned down a lot just because you're a child, you're not allowed to take these courses, and I feel I've gone past a lot of the children's courses, and I want to keep going.
Well, I mean, don't worry. People never take actors seriously anyway, so don't worry about not being taken seriously. Just beaver on there. I mean, I wouldn't forget about your childhood. You're going to have an awful long time to act. And you're being educated at home. Make sure you've got lots of friends, and you do.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because one of the things we have to do as actors is to live normal lives and to grow, to develop in a wide area. And if you're concentrating just on acting and not on kicking a ball about or riding horses or walking dogs or playing with brothers and sisters.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You've got to grow.
Yeah, I do, and I do try to, keep, go down, relax, and have a lot of fun with friends. But I still am quite interested in my career.
Well, that's great, and you'll probably do very well.
Yeah.
You obviously are doing well because that's a good series you're working in. So I would say, don't worry about people not taking you seriously. Decide what you want to do, what courses you want to do,
Okay.
and go for it. And if you don't get accepted this year, you're only 13. You've got a few years to
Yeah.
to get in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Right, Kev, anybody else for a question? Here we go.
My name is Pat McCarroll. I live in Galway. Just a brief question about film scripts. I've always been intrigued by the influence of technology on the whole business of producing films. What was the best film script you ever had, and what was the worst film script you ever had that actually got made?
That got made.
Yeah.
I think the worst one was a picture which I hope none of you have seen called Dungeons and Dragons. Where I was working with a director he'd never directed a film before, and he'd been given this huge budget by a man who made clothes in Hong Kong. And when I got there, they'd built an enormous tower, which most of the film seemed to take place on, but they built it too close to a blue site, so you couldn't use more than one half of the tower. And they also hadn't made it strong enough. They made it strong enough for the actors on it, but not for the camera crew. So we couldn't actually use the top of it. Complete mess up. A bad script and bad everything. But at least they paid me.
Hi, Jeremy. My name's Claire Louise. I'm a bit more of a book person than a film person, I have to admit. And a couple of the films that you've done have been based on books, obviously. And I was wondering, is there a book or a narrative poem that you would love to see adapted? And if there is a fictional character that you would really like to play?
Well, I have, and straight enough, the author is in the audience. A book which I'm hoping to get a script written for and to make around Derry in maybe next year, if we're lucky, if it all goes well. But I won't tell you what it is, because I sort of believe that if we talk about things, they don't happen. But there is in my head something. As far as a character, no. I've always thought I would have played it if I quite wanted to make a film of Richard II, of which I wanted to be Richard, but now I just want to direct it because I'm too old to play Richard, because no one's filmed that story. I probably never shall do that. But as far as playing a character, I'm in a lucky situation where really, certainly in theatre, that if I wanted to play something, if I was anywhere near right casting, I could. and I don't want to, so I suppose there's nothing I really want to play.
Evening, Mr. Irons. Very nice to have you in Galway. My name is Philip Fogarty. In terms of bringing ideas like Dead Ringers and Lolita to the screen, very, very controversial subjects, do you find that afterwards it may have actually closed doors for you as well as opening some? Did you find that in a professional sense it helped, it hindered as much as it helped? Or?
Yes, I think it did. Not so much Dead Ringers, which was a hugely admired piece, but Lolita, I remember, I put off doing it for a long time because I thought I played enough weirdos. I began listening to my wife. And everybody kept on me to do it, and Adrian Lyne said he wouldn't make the film unless I did it, and blah, blah, blah. And so eventually, and my agent was very keen I should do it, and I said, right, well, you have to get me a fee which allows me not to work for 3 years, because I don't think I will. And it did put a break on, not so much the film, because a lot of people didn't see the film, but I went out to bat for it, because I got very cross about people's reactions to the movie, and I had said that I would do no publicity when we came to sell it, and in fact I did a lot of publicity, mainly in America, castigating the lily-livered studios who wouldn't distribute it, and I don't think that endeared me to anybody. So it did put a bit of a break on, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank Jeremy for being so generous with his time and his humour and his expertise, not only today, but he's been around this festival and on the streets, and everybody's been delighted to see him. So thank you for coming. Thanks to Jeremy, and we'll see you all here.
And John, thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jeremy. You've been listening to John Kelly in Public, an interview with Jeremy Irons as part of the Galway Fleadh here at the Town Hall Theatre in Galway. Our thanks to Miriam Allen, David Coyne, the broadcast coordinator was Liam Conlon, on sound Andrew Kane, and the producer was Kevin Reynolds.